Right. So you can have ask any questions.
Yeah. Since one, too bad that there are not many people, but on the other hand, that we can ask more questions.
Right.
So, so I've been trying to follow Ghamidi Saab, and thank you very much.
Sorry.
And the thing is, Halaf wrote the book, The Impossible
Right.
State. So I think he answered most of the questions. What you're saying is, and it's pretty aligned with that whole the concept of khilafah and all those things. And on the lighter note, I was hoping you can touch upon the Ar-Rijalu Qawwamuna in Nisa also.
Okay.
Because nobody read the before I and after I. It's very practical for our environment nowadays. Can you just enlighten about, because the Hamiduddin Farahi Sahab originally started this Muntakhab Nisab or selection of ayah. Then Amin Islahi Sahab, the Dr. Sar Ahmed have his own viewpoint. Then Ghamidi Sahab have their own point. What is the differentiation? Are they using the similar methodology or concept? Because another critique can come that when you're reading the Quran, as a tafsir of the Quran, you're reading for someone else's lens, right? You're not reading by yourself. And you mentioned that we are intellectual, have to understand our own self, right? So, another argument that so this tafsir we are reading with the Ghamidi Sahab lens, right? And that's the one I like to understand your point of view. That that's like a one focus, because see, if you read Amin Islahi Sahab, it's a different mindset. Maududi Sahab is very simple language for the common people. So it's a different level of within the tafsir also. So where do you put that? Because it's a very differentiator, right? That Ghamidi Sahab came up with different ideas in the tafsir, and which is related to the current challenges. And that work is happening after a very long time. That's a question number one. The 1B is, what is the starting point of this taqleed? This is like the suppression of Ummah, like before, like after Ottoman Empire or before that time period, that we just find ourselves and says just preservation of the deen is only remain, that we just do taqleed only. Is that like a suppressed mindset we are still following? I like to understand your point.
So as far as your first question is concerned, I think that if you take a look at the history of tafsir, you'll find out that there are two specific strands of tafsir. One is called tafsir bi rawaya, which means that you interpret the Quran through hadith literature. And most of our scholars they subscribe to tafsir bi rawaya, including Maududi Sahab, including Dr. Israr Sahab, and a host of other people. What you can say is that Maududi Sahab and Israr Sahab are a step ahead of our traditional scholars, because they present their case in a very well argued way, in a very logical way. But then their approach is based on tradition, which means that you cannot interpret the Quran through your own intellect. You must use hadith literature or the literature of the Sahaba, which we call the Asar, in order to interpret the Quran. So this is one whole approach which is now prevailing, and most of the Ummah follows this approach. There is another approach which was championed by Ustaz Hamiduddin Farahi, and that is that you understand Quran directly from the Quran. So hadith is something which is in support. You can always have recourse to it, but it is not a means of understanding the Quran, because the Quran says that it has been revealed in clear Arabic, Arabiyya Mubin. And if it is revealed in clear Arabic, it means that you don't need anything to interpret the Quran other than having a good understanding of Arabic, other than having a beautiful understanding of classical Arabic. So one is that you understand the Quran directly. This is one approach, which is followed by the Farahi school. And the traditional school says that you cannot understand the Quran directly through your intellect. You must take recourse to hadith literature. So I'm not saying which one is right and which one is wrong. But what I'm saying is that both are diametrically opposite. So in one, you directly plunge into the Quran. In the other, you don't plunge into the Quran. You go through a different route. You look up hadith, you look up Asar Sahaba, etc., and then you understand a particular verse. So that's a specific verse.
These are the very specific words, and 3 times in the Quran, and they all
right. So you see, it's like a question of this approach. So one approach is directly understanding the Quran, and the other approach is to indirectly understand the Quran. And whichever approach you adopt, both have led to diametrically opposite conclusions. And this is why you find so much difference at times when Ghamidi Sahab speaks of something and you say, well, we never heard of it in earlier times. Because simply you didn't hear of it because people never adopted it route. They adopted understanding the Quran through hadith literature. And I can tell you out of my own study that there are very few ahadith which actually explain the Quran. Maybe you can count them on your fingertips. So a bulk of the explanation of the Quran has been done by the Asar and even more by the Tabi'un, which we call the Maktur Rawayas. And you'll find Tafsir of Tabari, for example, being replete of explanation of the Quran, neither from the Prophet himself, very few from the Sahaba, but in very large quantity from the Tabi'un. And this is how they make up their argument by saying, well, if they did not find so many hadith, then at least the Sahaba students, which are the Tabi'un, were the ones who were explaining the Quran, and they couldn't have done it from their own thinking. They must have learned it from the Sahaba, and the Sahaba must have learned it from the Prophet. So ultimately, if even we find these sayings of the Tabi'un, so they can also be used to interpret the Quran, because after all, the Tabi'un go right back to the Prophet. So this is how they justify that, yes, the Quran must be read. Whereas, of course, the Farai school has an entirely different view, and that is why you find at times some of the conclusions that they draw are totally different from what you have generally heard or used to.
And the second part, the Taqleed one.
So the Taqleed actually started, if you read the history, again, that certain jurists, their fiqh or their understanding was adopted by the state. And so these four famous jurists, Abu Hanifa, Malik, Shafi, and Imam Ahmed bin Hanbal, so all four of them, their fiqh became state law. So the Malikis, Imam Malik's fiqh became prevalent in North Africa. The Hanbalis, it became prevalent in Saudi Arabia and in the Gulf. The Shafiites, or the Shafi fiqh became in Indonesia and in Malaysia. And the Hanafi fiqh has become very famous in India and Pakistan and parts which surround it. So these four fiqh were actually adopted as state law. And because they were adopted as state law, so state law is just one. You cannot have a difference of opinion. So once they became state law, it was said that now you follow what has been now implemented or adopted. So this is how Taqleed began. It began on a positive note, I would say, that they were made as the state law. But what compounded this situation, or what worsened, is that it ended up in Taqleed of scholars themselves. So scholarly Taqleed means that if you're a born Hanafi, and if you, in a particular issue, you think the Shafi'ites are correct or the Hanbalis are correct, and your own inner self says that Imam Hanifa is slightly weak here, you cannot leave your fold and go to become a Hanbali or a Shafi, because once you're born a Hanafi, the training is that even if you think Abu Hanifa or the Hanafites are not correct in a particular issue, you still have to follow them. So this blind following became a curse once the scholars themselves realized that the scholar that they are following is at times falling short in a particular issue, but because they are his followers, they cannot go to some other person to follow it. So this became very rampant in certain areas in certain times. And this is very much like a political party, I would say, in which you become so attached to your leader that even if he is saying something which you find is weak, you still support him, because you think that how can I not support him even if my opponent's opinion is correct. So on a very similar note, you'll find that people who are born Hanafi, they stay Hanafi. People who are born Ahl Hadith, they stay Ahl Hadith, even if they think at times that my rival's opinion could be correct. But because the indoctrination is that you have to lull your conscience to sleep, you have to lull your intellect to sleep and just blindly follow what your Imam has said, that it has become a big curse now. So today, people who are born, they are made to put their intellect to sleep. They are taught that the Hanafi madrasa teaches that you are absolutely correct and the rest are absolutely wrong. And the Shafi'i madrasas teach that your interpretation is absolutely correct and the rest are wrong. Even if your mind does not accept it, just put it to sleep, because you are on the right. So this is how it has become a curse, and it is continuing to become a curse.
Allama Iqbal said that तकलीद की रविश से बेहतर है खुदकशी, रास्ता भी ढूंढ खिदर का सौदा भी छोड़ दे.
बिल्कुल.
खिदर का रास्ता is the intellectual rasta.
Right.
So just for the taqleed thing, recently I heard hearing engineer Muhammad Ali Mirza, I think you know him from Jala.
Right.
He says he does make sense basically, right? He uses his intellect and everything.
Right.
So couple questions, quick one. So the Quran was already there in Lohe Mahfuz, right? Before it got revealed to Prophet Muhammad. So it was since Adam, Quran was already
No, this is not correct. Again, see, the Lohe Mahfuz is a place, if you study the Quran, from where Gabriel was given revelations for a particular instance, and he collected the revelations from that place, and then he brought it down. So it's not that the entire Quran was present in the Lohe Mahfuz. Once a particular revelation was meant to be given to Gabriel, so to speak, that part of revelation would be sent to the Lawh Mahfuz, and Gabriel would take it from the Lawh Mahfuz and give it to the heart of the Prophet. So, it's like a hard drive. It's like a sequential arrange. It's not that all of the Quran was there at Lawh Mahfuz. It was part of the Quran, and it was revealed in 22 years.
I mean, it was already there. Full.
Where does it say that?
No, I mean, I'm just thinking.
It's not like that.
Allah had it, right?
I mean,
knew what
Allah
is
had
going
it in
on
His
the
mind.
Quran, right?
So you see,
Yeah.
having Allah in Allah's mind is one thing, and having it outside in a tablet is something else.
Right.
It's not like that. So God created. I mean, God was the author of the Quran, just like you could be the author of a book. So potentially, you have the book in your mind. If you write a book, you have it in your mind. But once you write it, you cannot be called an author of that. I mean, unless you write it, you cannot be called an author. So God became an author once He started to reveal whatever He had in His mind.
Yeah. I mean, I guess my main question was like, for example, Surah Lahab, right? So Allah already, I mean, we know that ayah was going to be revealed, right? It's not like Allah thought, okay, now I'm going to reveal it, right?
No, so you
Because
see what
Abu
happens.
Lahab did this, okay,
I
now I'm
mean,
going to
what you can say is that it was revealed at that instance.
Right.
But the Almighty had foreknowledge of what will happen. So these are two entirely different things. So you see, if God is beyond time and space. Things are happening in time and space. So to speak, He is outside these limits of time and space in which we are living. So whatever we'll do ourselves through our own free will. But God being outside the concept of time and space, He has foreknowledge of what we'll do. His knowledge does not mean that He's driving you to do that. I mean, He's not forcing you to do that. You'll do it out of your own accord, out of your own free will. But whatever you'll do will be in God's knowledge. So these are two, I would say, independent things.
Right, because again, just like whatever happened in Ghazwa Badr, Ghazwa Uhud, all of that was already.
God already knew that, of
He
course,
knew it.
because.
And then it got
But
revealed in Surah
you see, what
Al-Fatiha.
happens is knowing is one thing,
Right.
and making it happen is another thing.
Yeah.
It happened through natural circumstances, but the result was something which God already knew. So knowing a result is not like driving it to happen or making it happen. It happened out of the circumstances which arose, but God knew what circumstances would arise and what people would do. So it's like having foreknowledge without affecting that thing to happen or making that thing happen.
One thing, like in the post-prophetic era, you said, like, no need to kill Muslims or
Right.
Murtad. So, question about Hazrat Abu Bakr, right? He, in post-prophetic era, he did fight against the Murtad,
So
right?
his
Why
era
did
was
he do it?
continuing. But you see, the Sahaba were continuing with that prophetic era. Remember, they were just completing the mission of the Prophet. The Quran has said, either we'll give you death, and whatever the punishment is going to be given to them is going to be given to them right after their death. So it's that the Prophet had completed his work, and his work was just being completed by the Sahaba. So they were not doing their own work, or they were not initiating anything. They were just completing something which the Prophet had already started. So once that ended, actually it should have ended at that time. Unfortunately, the momentum was such that after the Sahaba, it still continued.
So, if, like, today in 2022, somebody becomes a Murtad, there's no need.
Absolutely not.
There's no need.
Not only no need, it would be
justification,
wrong.
okay.
There is no justification.
No justification.
Because irtidad was something which was, or apostasy was something which was specific to God's era, to prophetic era.
So, for my ignorance, what's the difference between Islamic jurisprudence versus prophetic era? I mean, we follow jurisprudence.
So you see, Islamic jurisprudence is the understanding of Islam which our jurists have. So like it's not monolithic. It's not that every jurist has the same view, but the understanding of Islamic directives is called fiqh or jurisprudence. That is one thing. That is the understanding. The prophetic era and the non-prophetic era is just a timeline of history. It's like making you understand that there is this era in which God takes matters in His own hands, in which prophets of God were sent from Adam to Muhammad. This is the prophetic era, and the post-prophetic era is the era after that. So it's like a historical timeline of religious history, so that you are able to understand that the prophetic era had certain characteristics which cannot be extended in the post-prophetic era, and our jurists have not understood it in this way. It is Farais, I just mentioned his name to you. He might be new to you, but he's the person who said that this is one of the mistakes that we are making, or one of the mistakes which our jurisprudence is making, that by not differentiating between the prophetic era and the post-prophetic era, it is actually extending some of the prophetic directives into the post-prophetic era, which we are not authorized to, because those directives require the presence of a messenger of God. If that messenger is not present, you cannot implement those directives. So the Quran says, "Ma kunna mu'azzibina hatta nab'asa rasula." You cannot punish people, or I don't punish people. God says, unless the messenger is in between them.
So how do we differentiate, like chopping off a hand for the crime
For
of
amputation of
robbery
hands, yeah. So
versus
you see, that's another thing, that when you read about the Sharia, regarding, for example, the amputation of hands, or the punishment of adultery or fornication, or some of the other punishments I mentioned, you'll see that the context is absolutely something which does not limit it to the people who are living in the era of the Prophet. It's like a general verse which tells us that there are certain punishments for certain crimes. Again, there is a logic behind them, but they cannot be mixed up with by telling you that they are meant for the era of the Prophet himself, because the crux of this understanding is that punishments which relate to polytheism, disbelief, and apostasy, these are the three punishments which God says only I can give. I gave them through my messengers, and I'll give them again on the day of judgment. But you're not authorized. So in the post-prophetic era, because God's messengers are not present, or in other words, He Himself does not directly interfere, so we cannot invoke those punishments. God says this is something I can do. I did this in the prophetic era. I'll do it again on the day of judgment.
around those areas of the practical.
Right. So these three areas, wherever the punishment of disbelief, polytheism, which is kufr, shirk, and irtidad, and apostasy, these are the three areas about which God says that only I have the prerogative.
I think this is Dr. Sar, he said the same thing. And if we don't do the effort, right, and that made your original point that where Quran and Islam is in our life, right, the priorities level,
Right.
We have a priority for everything, to be a good, when I came to America, I don't know the English, I don't speak English. English more like a British style, because we born and raised in Pakistan. But we learn English and the slang language because I used to live in New York and I'm working in corporate America. So that's the whole idea, right? We have to put the efforts to learn the Quran, right? Learn our deen, because what if we don't know what we're gonna be disseminating downstream to our next generation,
Right.
So that's
We know about Tesla more than we know about Quran.
But that's why I'm still.
We are common person needs to approach.
Because this question, I'm still not, because this is the danger of doing yourself Islam. This is
So you should not do it. You see, what you're doing is you're not doing it yourself. You're just reading it, and if you have a question,
For barakah, sure.
Why not?
For some inspiration, sure.
No, we can
but
agree to
look
disagree.
look what the Quran says. It says Hudallin Nas.
So, Dr. Saleem, Alif Lam Mim, Zalikal Kitabu La Rayba Fihi Hudal Lil-Muttaqin, and the
Right.
ayah go here. I'm a computer science major. I studied binary logic, right?
Okay.
If true, else
Else
right?
false.
Now let's reverse the ayah. It says Hudal Lil-Muttaqin, right? It says there is no doubt. What is the conditionality on that? The one who believes in the Yawm al-Akhirah, the one who, and the ayah goes no. Now, what?
No, I have a different understanding of the verses.
But think about it. A person who does not fit in that shart, right? Would the Quran still be guidance for him?
Let me tell you, that is not a condition.
No.
To you, it's a condition. To me, it's not.
No, but Dr. Saleem, okay, well then go ahead and explain to me.
I can explain the whole passage to you, but you see, that will be another discussion. What I'm saying is,
but I'm on the surface, I'm just saying that's what you're.
sir, what I'm saying is the Quran says it is Hudallin Nas. It is guidance for all.
True, but Quran has majaz, because it is talking, the ijaz, it is talking at different levels. You give an ayah of the tahara, of that, okay, don't come to the Quran. Now, that when we say that our deen is complete, right? Human beings and the complexity of human beings and complexity of intellect. So yes, a same ayah is appealing to Dr. Israr at a different level. The same ayah has a meaning. The same ayah has a meaning to Ghamidi Saab, and
Right.
he's making a meaning out of it. But for a common person, right, his comprehension of that ayah and the meaning is not that.
I understand what you're
And
saying.
that's the
I
majaz
understand
of
what you're
Quran.
saying, but I humbly differ and I say that the Quran tells us it is guidance for all. And if there is a question that arises in your mind, you can always discuss it with a scholar. And if you have a different understanding and you're sincere in your quest for the truth, even if you end up with a different understanding, you'll be rewarded for that.
Dr. Saleem, all the terrorism, all these terrorists, all these people, all Jamaat Islamiyah, all these in Egypt and all that, in Jamaat Islami Pakistan, and what they're doing in universities and all that, This is precisely because of this methodology.
What I'm
of that
telling
we
you,
can- that we can-
it's happened between scholars also.
that we can directly go to the Quran and understand it.
Kazim
That's
Sahib,
the thing.
I understand the point that you're making, but this is something which even scholars can disagree about. I mean, the scholars, even they can follow the same opinion as what Osama bin Laden has said. So this does not preclude the fact that a misunderstanding cannot take place. The highest and the most competent of people can make errors, and the lesser ones can also make errors. So error and misunderstanding is a human deficiency, which can take place at all levels.
I think this is not.
Okay, let's agree to disagree. Let's agree to disagree.
That's a different.
So can I have?
flip
All right.
side opinion to that. So blindly following also leads to issues such as atheism, right? Because these, youth, they don't understand all of these issues, right? They're not reading the Quran in depth.
You're not
They're
supposed
not
to even
reading-
argue.
So that you're saying that don't learn more about it. Just
No, I'm not saying that.
No, not
All
learn.
I'm saying
Don't-
is that you're not even supposed to argue with an atheist. Dr. Saleem is supposed to argue with an atheist because he has the knowledge and the intellect to basically counter the argument. Me and you, where do I?
So you see, this is an entirely different thing. We're talking about reading the Quran. So you see, the Quran has been sent as a guidance for mankind. So what here perhaps some of us are humbly submitting in your janab is that you see what we are trying to make this point is that God has made this guidance available to all of us. Wherever we think that we are not being able to understand it, we can consult a scholar. And if in spite of our sincerity, we end up misunderstanding it, in spite of our sincerity, there are indications in the Quran which tell us that God will accept that because we did not do it out of any insincerity. It's a human construct that we can make errors in spite of the fact that we could be very competent.